Okay, so welcome back, Leather Apron Club and everyone else. If you could be kind enough to just confirm you can hear me, please.
Yep, I can hear you.
That is fantastic. So thank you again for your indulgence and your patience. There will be a little bit of silence while we are assembling other guests, and Alt Hype should be along in just a moment. I need to just drop him the new link. Okay, new link. Sorry for fusion. Okay, Alt Hype has that. Another upcoming guest has that via WhatsApp. And oh my gosh, that's a very rapid appearance of rather a well-known and honoured guest. So Leather Apron Club, in a moment, Mr. Jared Taylor shall be coming up as a speaker. It will be my pleasure to introduce you gentlemen to one another. Hopefully in just a few moments he will be with us.
Yeah.
Mr. Taylor, are you able to confirm that you can hear me? You may need to click on the mic button to unmute yourself, possibly. Okay, and Leather Apron Club, I will just send you the invitation as co-host. Don't worry, you mentioned that you're a little new to X Spaces, so it just means that you'll have a mute button that you can use if someone talks over you and you want to instantly just stop that from happening.
Roger. Yeah, don't think we'll have to use that, hopefully, anyhow.
I think that's unlikely. Now, according to the UI, which is famously glitchy in X Spaces, I'll give people advanced warning. I might not see people who are raising hands. I apologize if that happens. Mr. Jared Taylor appears to be present. Mr. Taylor, are you able to confirm that you can hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Leather Apron Club, are you able to hear Mr. Taylor?
Yes, I can. And good to talk to you, Mr. Taylor. We actually met briefly in Detroit at the event that didn't end up happening. The AFDAC.
Well, it happened in a truncated manner.
Yeah. I was actually I don't know if you remember. I was the guy that was sat next to you at the donors dinner. I was the guy not wearing a suit. I was like the only one. Which, in my defense, we weren't told about it till like an hour beforehand, and our hotel was like an hour away. So, yeah, we were the guys that showed up looking like chumps. But
well, let us agree that not everything was perfectly organized on that occasion.
Yeah, a couple things went a little
forgiven.
haywire.
I don't want to unduly pry if there's any element of diplomacy or even secrecy that needs to be maintained, but it's an event of which I know nothing, I believe.
Oh, everyone's heard of it. It was Nick Fuentes' meeting in Detroit.
Oh, I see.
No secrecy necessary.
Oh, I see. Oh, well, then I hope that I'm vaguely aware of starting to come back to me. Yes, the disruption, but that's managed to sort of carry on and something productive came of it in the end, I suppose.
The main event was canceled, but there was some sort of like periphery, some stuff going around on the peripheries, like a little party at a rooftop bar, a little get together that also ended up getting shut down.
Yes, it was quite chaotic, but it was a qualified triumph in the fact there were, I suppose, a certain number of the speakers were able to deliver their talks, but to a limited audience. And it was in a venue that was so close to other noisy bars that it was very difficult to hear the speakers. But it was an exciting time nonetheless.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you for helping me get up to speed on that. It's particularly, it's a little overwhelming that I have present two gentlemen for whom I have enormous personal respect, and I know that there is widespread interest in both of your work. So without further ado, I won't deprive listeners of the chance to hear more from both of you. Specifically, Leather Apron Club, in your own words, if you'd like to take a few moments. Recently, Mr. Taylor has graced us with his presence, and a lot of my followers are at least broadly familiar with his work. Just to make sure people are up to speed with yourself, if you might want to give a description, an overview of what you've been doing for the last sort of 2 or 3 years on YouTube, sort of people would love to hear from you.
Yeah, of course. So yeah, I run a YouTube channel called Leather Apron Club, and you can just call me Alex. It's a bit awkward having to be referred to as Leather or whatever. But yeah, so
Was that? I'm so
it
sorry to
started
interrupt
off
you so early there. Alec or Alex?
Alex.
I've made a note, so do continue, Alex.
Yeah, yeah. So YouTube channel basically started off as a way just to post some philosophy videos to maybe a dozen people that would watch. I eventually started working on what really first got me notoriety was doing a couple videos where I talked about Jewish overrepresentation just in certain podcasts, the big ones, Joe Rogan's, Lex Friedman's, Jordan Peterson's, and the like. And it was just basically to highlight this pattern that I saw repeated again and again, where you'd have, as low as 20%, but as high as 40 or 50% sometimes on these podcasts of all the guests that were showing up were ethnically Jewish people. So that was sort of my way, in the most down to earth way, very black and white. I essentially just provided people with spreadsheets demonstrating this fact. It was a way for me to hopefully, while not triggering any sort of censorship on YouTube, start a conversation with people about this issue who otherwise might be reluctant to engage with it. And that was, I guess that was the first thing that started really kind of getting views on YouTube. In addition to that, I've made a couple videos about historical revisionism, and just kind of, in my opinion, writing the historical record about like ancient Greece and Rome. And the videos on those were basically about like whether or not there was widespread homosexuality at the time. Anyways, yeah, I've been slacking a little bit pretty in the last year making any videos because I've been working on a big project that has just unfortunately faced a lot of delays, but it's sort of going to be the culmination of that work, in which I discuss Jewish overrepresentation. So it's essentially going to be a website with millions and millions of profiles of public figures on it. And it will do, among many other things, it will highlight each person's ethnicity. And it's essentially going to be a tool to examine the same problem across all different walks of life, be it in government, media, certain other, unsavory industries in which those types of people are involved, like pornography is a big one, obviously. And it's essentially just a way for people to see, again, in a very level-headed, black and white, data-driven way, that there is a real problem of overrepresentation. And I want it to be essentially just like an introduction for people who otherwise might not engage with this topic that they see as taboo. So yeah, that website, it's not live yet. I would give the name, except that it technically is on the internet right now. So if I give you the name, then people would be able to find it. But yeah, the plan is probably sometime this month, actually, that I will be announcing that and putting that website up live for people to start using. And I can get more into like the features, because it's much more than just like a database where you can look up individuals. There's a lot more to it, but yeah, that's the basic idea. And then hopefully I'll be able to go back to making other videos, not just on this one particular topic. After that, I'll have a lot more free time to devote to this.
Well, congratulations on approaching it in such a data-driven way. I think that's extremely important. People have to have the facts, and anyone who's in position to supply the facts is doing a valuable service. I just hope that you'll be very careful and not make any mistakes, because that will affect the credibility of everything you say. And I envy you the fact that you're still on YouTube. Getting kicked off of YouTube was a great blow to my attempt to reach more people, but at least I have returned to X, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed to see if I don't get bounced off that. But yes, congratulations on this powerful data-driven approach to what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I have to say what a pleasure and a privilege it is to have a pair of gentlemen present who are, in a way, addressing different ends of a spectrum that are necessarily connected, and both doing it in ways which are level-headed and civilized and not emotionally reflexive. A huge problem on the X platform is that there are two types of problem which people tend to make, one or the other. It's unusual to find someone making absolutely neither of them. there is a kind of lazy-minded, very widespread tendency among large numbers of people to attribute all problems with society to, quote, the Jews in a very lazy, non-specific way, and then move on as if that's job done and no further political, historical, or economic analysis required, which is clearly rather stupid. There are another group of people who assume that any reference to Jews in any way must be motivated by some kind of hatred or emotional expression or lack of information or some sort of ideological commitment, instead of simply someone who's noticed one or two facts and wants to ask more questions about them. And I don't want to be personally guilty of making either one of those mistakes. And I know I'm going to make them, and so are lots of other people. So having both of you gentlemen here to help nudge me back onto a kind of, back on the rails, as it were, as I might deviate either way, is just invaluable. And I hope for a lot of people who may be listening. Mr. Taylor, you're rather a famous individual, as you have spent several decades advocating for our people. So most people will be very familiar with you and your work. But just in case perhaps some young people are listening who may be approaching politics sort of rather afresh, perhaps you might be kind enough to say one or two words about your decades of activism and advocacy. And keeping in mind, you may need to click the unmute button to be able to do that.
That's a good idea. Yes, one must never assume that people know anything about me at all. I started American Renaissance as a print publication in 1990. So that is probably before some of you were even born, and some of you were just sucking your little pink toes in the cradle. But as a print publication, it never got over 4,000 in circulation. And so the internet has been a godsend to dissidents like me. And since then, I've really been able to reach far, far, far more people. As I said earlier, the YouTube channel was a particularly effective way of reaching people, and being blasted out of that was a real setback. But, well, as I say, we'll see how long Twitter lasts. But I really see my job as falling along two different lines. One is race realism, the recognition that race is a biological phenomenon. It's not some sort of psychological optical illusion. And the other is white advocacy, namely that whites, just like every other race, have legitimate group interests. And unless we are prepared to defend them, certainly no one else will. And in a world in which every other race is banding together along very, very explicitly racial lines, for us to be the only group not to be pressing our legitimate interests is a kind of unilateral disarmament in a dangerous world. And those have been the two positions that I've been trying to promote. And I suppose you could describe it in even larger terms as one of trying to convince whites that it is perfectly natural, normal, healthy, and the most moral thing in the world for whites to defend their own interests and to wish for their own people to survive and prosper. Whites are, of course, the only people whom you have to explain that this is moral and natural and normal and healthy. But I think we're making progress. More progress has been made in the last several years than perhaps in all of the 30 that I was trying to do this. So I believe we're living in very, very encouraging times.
Well, that's very heartening, and I think a lot of people share your sense of encouragement, especially X in its current state. It's so visibly different from the Jack Dorsey days of Twitter, in what seems to be broadly a good way. Leather Apron Club, Alex, I noticed you've had to drop down and recycle, so this is just one of the considerations. Unfortunately, the flip side of X is the code is a little flaky. I think Elon fired a lot of staff when the network was very bloated, and now it's got the other kind of problem. Things are being held together.
Yeah, so I'm back.
Welcome back. Fantastic. One of the things I wanted to ask while both of you gentlemen are present, by the way, apologies on behalf of Ryan Falk. I'm sure Alternative Hypothesis should be along briefly. And to anyone who's a little confused about the title of the space, it's a birthday space. Someone present among us has a birthday. I won't say who, for the sake of all the doxers out there. But returning to the topic in hand, Alex, one of your quite well-known videos was an investigation into Ashkenazi Jew. Excuse me, what a wonderful Freudian slip. Ashkenazi IQ as Jewish overrepresentation, such that it may exist, it seems to, in some sense, is often explained purely in terms of intelligence, and you have one or two things, well, at least at the time you made the video, to say about that. If you might want to sort of state what conclusions you drew and what information you gathered there, and whether your opinions or knowledge has changed since you made the video.
Maybe it's become a bit more refined, but I mean, largely, I think the conclusion still stands. I'm still happy with the video. Yeah, essentially, a lot of the estimates of supposed Ashkenazi IQ, they're made either off of a faulty study, which maybe it looks at kindergartners or a particularly gifted subset of Ashkenazi children, or it's just odd in some other way. Maybe that's the sample size was like 7 or so students or something like that. Like these were legitimate studies put out, and these are the ones that are often cited in order to bolster this claim of it's usually 115 average Ashkenazi IQ. Pretty much the video was just arguing that if you actually look at a larger meta-analysis in a sort of way of all of these studies which look at Ashkenazi IQ, while they probably do have an advantage and like a significant one over other subpopulations in the US, they are neither the highest IQ subpopulation in the US, nor is it anywhere near the 115 figure or thereabouts. And that would be essentially, it would have to be around there in order to have enough explanatory power to explain this Jewish overrepresentation purely in terms of IQ. So the conclusion of the video is essentially this shouldn't be surprising, but in any sufficiently complex problem, there are going to be a multitude of contributing factors to explain it. But it is clear to me from my research that IQ alone is not nearly sufficient enough to explain Jewish overrepresentation, and there have to be other factors. Now, again, there are going to be a multitude of factors, and there are going to be a lot of mundane factors that go towards explaining the overrepresentation. And these could be things like they live in a more urban population, and the centers of power, especially for like media, news or entertainment, they're going to be more focused in places like LA and New York. So it's no surprise that Jews are going to be, to a certain extent, overrepresented. But in any case, I think it's necessarily the fact that there have to be other, let's say, more backhanded factors that also contribute to this overrepresentation. And obviously, nepotism among Jewish people is just colloquially famous. So I think that's not an unfair assumption to say that probably plays like an important factor in explaining some of their overrepresentation. So yeah, that was the general gist of it, I suppose.
That sounds like a very helpful overview. Thank you very much, Alex. I'm about to hand over to Jared Taylor for any comments he might have on that work and surrounding topics. Just before I do, it's worth me mentioning that since I read White Identity for Mr. Taylor as an audiobook, I have no excuse to be entirely unfamiliar with the content. And there's a particularly interesting chapter. And indeed, I run the risk of confusing two books, as I also read If We Do Nothing. But the chapter on genetic interests, Frank Salter's work. Mr. Taylor, please forgive me if you'd be kind enough to remind me which of your books this is from. They're both on my shelf. I have to go and check now.
I wrote about Frank Salter's on genetic interests in White Identity. And for those of you who are not familiar with the book, it really is an eye-opening and very careful scientific examination of just to what extent all whites have shared genotypes. And one of the most startling of his findings was that if a Dane, for example, were to have a child with a Bantu, the genetic difference between Danes and Bantus is so great that a Dane will be more genetically related to any other Danish person than he will be to his own child. I find that a very startling fact. Most of us think that we cannot be more related to strangers in our society than we could be to our own children. But because a Dane and a Bantu are, again, so distant, then that the number of Danish genes is so diluted, represented, relatively speaking, only 50%, that you as the father or the mother, in the case would be, you are more closely related to any other person in Denmark, and probably in related groups as well. Northern Germans, you're more closely related to all of those people than you are to your own child. But that's just one of the many startling and eye-opening facts that Frank Salter presents in this remarkable book.
It really is a remarkable book, and one of the perhaps valuable takes from considering that perspective is if you begin, for example, to read evolutionary biology, and you look at strategies that animals use to compete and survive, you can look at that, of course, in a non-moral way. If you look at birds who are either cooperating or exploiting one another, you tend not to reflexively make moral judgments about birds. You simply realize they've inherited a set of genes that compel them to adopt certain strategies. And yet, at some point along our evolutionary history, humans get treated as if we've magically floated free of all of these considerations. And I think one advantage in keeping that genetic perspective is it's an antidote to that moral reflex to condemn and hate and fight and so on. And especially with regard to any sense that whites have suffered at the hands of non-white groups or been the victims of any kind of exploitation or subversion. Well, if a group is to pursue its own genetic interests, one can hardly morally condemn a group for simply going about doing that, any more than one would condemn a parent running into a burning building to rescue a child. And so, rather than seeking to tear down people who compete with us, it might be sufficient that we build ourselves up enough and become less vulnerable to that kind of attack. And then no one needs to hate anyone. We can simply retain, or in some cases, recover our white spaces. So I've been attempting to look at things through that lens. And I don't know how reasonable it is to consider Jews as a distinct genetic group in addition to a distinct cultural and religious group, and how well that explains things and fits in with things. And perhaps Mr. Taylor, if you have any commentary on that, and then Alex.
Well, there is certainly no question that Jews have a very intense loyalty to their own people. As I often point out, all of the other peoples that are mentioned in the Bible, for the most part, beginning with the Philistines or the Hivites, the Jebusites or the Amorites and the Amalekites, none of them around anymore. But there are still Jews because they had such a firm and fierce sense of their own identity. They were prepared to marry amongst themselves generation after generation after generation, despite a certain number of Jews who were sort of peeled off and lost in some kind of surrounding Gentile society. But I think that for whites, it is perfectly normal to have a kind of fellow feeling for whites, for fellow whites, no matter who they are, no matter where they are, because they are our extended genetic family. And I often point out to people, skeptics about this sort of thing, that we love our own children, not necessarily because they are the smartest and the best looking and the most musical and the most talented and the most athletic. No, because they're ours. They're ours. And our family is ours. And whether good or bad, white people are our extended genetic family. And of course, I love my children more than I love anybody else's children, but that doesn't mean I have any hostility. In fact, I can be quite fond of many children that belong to other people. But there are sacrifices that I'll make for mine that I take for granted and that everyone else would take for granted. This, to me, is the normal way that human beings operate. They have a sense of loyalty to their kin. And to try to build a world in which this kind of loyalty is demonized is utter folly, especially when this sense of loyalty to kin is demonized only when it is whites who express it. And that is the situation today. Now, Jews are a particularly interesting group from that point of view because they have been expressing this powerful sense of kinship to their own group so thoroughly. Although there is a lot of lamentation in many Jewish circles about the number of young Jews these days who end up marrying Gentiles. I remember being surprised to see that these days in the United States, the number is approaching 50%. And at that rate, every generation will have a much smaller number of people who are full-blooded Jews. But Acceptable Frog, I had told you that I had only a certain amount of time available. And although you don't seem to be in a position to reveal whose birthday it is, I happen to know whose birthday it is, and I would like to wish that person a very, very happy birthday indeed. But it's at this point that I must bid you all farewell. So I will repeat, happy birthday, but I will say no more.
Mr. Taylor, the happy birthday recipient will no doubt be delighted to hear that from you. I'm so pleased and honored that you've had time to come into the space and talk with myself and Alex. I very much hope that there'll be other occasions further down the line, and congratulations on your monumental return to the X platform. And it's very pleasing to see that you've been allowed to remain till now, 75,000 followers and climbing. Anyone present in the space that doesn't currently follow Mr. Taylor, I would heartily encourage them to do so. And Alex, perhaps if you have any words for Mr. Taylor while he's still with us.
Yeah, it was great of you to stop by. Great to be in a space with you. And yeah, I suppose while we're in this sort of upswing of less censorship, it seems, on the social media platforms, might as well make hay while the sun shines.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And stick to data. I like data in any reliable form. So I think you're doing a great service to anyone who will be stopping by your website. Congratulations. So goodbye to all of you, and best wishes to all of you.
Mr. Taylor,
thank you.
Thank you so much for stopping by. That really is absolutely marvelous, and wish you every success with your ongoing projects at American Renaissance and elsewhere. And Alex, well, clearly there's such huge overlap between your concerns and that of Mr. Taylor, and it's really interesting to have a chance to talk to you about so many projects, because you've really been having a number of irons in a number of fires, so to speak, since you've sort of proceeded through your YouTube career. What have you found has kind of garnered the most interest and controversy and sent you down maybe some unexpected rabbit holes? I don't know, the bug eating parts, or the IQ parts, or the
I mean, certainly as of right now, I think the main focus of my channel is going to be to promote the Jewish representation stuff, and maybe I will get the opportunity to expand into other sort of territories more completely as I sort of wrap this up, and like as I finish up this big culminating project around it. Yeah, I mean, but that's certainly the main drive. The bug eating one, it's funny. I made the video first and foremost because it was something that I thought was interesting, and that's ultimately what I'm going to make a video about. But I also thought it was a good opportunity to, as again, the primary thrust of what I'm doing is to try to initiate this conversation in a level-headed, data-driven way to people who are, probably going to be otherwise reluctant to engage in a conversation about Jewish overrepresentation and Jewish power. Doing that as a sort of way to sidestep the defenses that have been put up in their minds by things like public schooling and mass media and things like that, where they're unwilling to discuss these things because, what would that make me if I'm openly discussing Jewish overrepresentation? This is like Schindler's List or something. It's like what that movie told me not to be. Yeah. So with that in mind, the eating bugs video was kind of a way to, like, can I essentially get a more conservative, normie audience, to look at something like this? The eating the bugs thing, especially at the time, it was a couple of years ago, was very much a concern of conservatives.
You struck while the iron was hot. I was paying some attention to social media at the time, and definitely you couldn't have picked a more kind of a live topic. No pun intended.
Yeah, funny. I was even I was contacted by Tucker Carlson. I guess has he had some like documentary program while he was still on Fox News, where a crew.
I thought you were going to say he had a bug farm. Okay.
No, he did not have a bug farm. But yeah, I forgot what it was called. Tucker Carlson Investigates or something. But he would have a crew go out and make these like 30-minute documentaries about whatever conservatives were talking about, essentially at that time. And he did one on eating bugs. And the producer was like reaching out to me and like was asking me for a bunch of sources, and like we went back and forth, and I provided him with a bunch of stuff. And I was actually supposed to get a credit. I was promised a credit. He was like, well, we'll either use some of your video, at least some of the part, or at least some of the sources, and at the very least, you're going to get a credit in the in like the final thing. I watched the thing and I did not get a credit, which is unfortunate. So I don't know if they looked up like the rest of my videos and saw what my content was about, but
Oh, it could
I thought
have.
it was kind of a funny story.
Yeah, somebody could have just got a little bit nervous that some executive up the chain may have been very displeased and didn't want to rock the boat. I don't know.
Right.
I shouldn't speculate, but I'm not as surprised as perhaps I might otherwise be. You remind me of really. I had the chance to watch Jared Taylor's The Color of Crime reports from the 90s when I think the New Century Foundation, I'll have to confirm that, produced the report. And Mr. Taylor stood at a podium and spoke to an assembled audience of journalists and took questions on this report, which was about interracial crime at the time. And I suppose even back then, there was still this fantasy hope that maybe this was just an unpleasant man rocking the boat about race, and oh dear, that's not nice. Can we please just all move forward together into this lovely racial utopia that's just around the corner? And of course, that didn't arrive. And racial conflicts it's hard to argue that it's got anything other than worse, not better, since the 90s. So Jared Taylor was in a sense more like a canary in a coal mine rather than a doom monger. It seems we have very good reason to pay attention to racial conflict. It doesn't just go away of its own accord. And I suspect something of that sort may be occurring now with regard to Jewish overrepresentation, that we're at this stage where it's now possible for civilized, polite society to discuss this topic. And it's unfortunate that so few people are taking the opportunity to do that in a responsible, as we've said, data-driven way, as yourself. So really, there are not many people like you, Alex. There are people who are screaming and shouting, "It's the Jews," and subtracting from their own seriousness by doing it in such a clumsy way. And then there are people who are just afraid and just refuse to consider that Jews may be in any way relevant, and assume that you're a horrible, monstrous person if you consider the possibility, and precious few people in between. In your own social circle, perhaps people you work with, family, have you found that Overton window is widening now in the last 2-3 years?
Oh yeah, certainly. Yeah, just even within my personal life, I've just among friends and family, it's come up certain times, and I tend not to talk a lot about like any of the research I do or the videos I make with them, but yeah, I've noticed that it's just become like something that's even you can talk about it around a campfire and nobody, it's not in hushed tones like it may have been in the past. I do also want to add as a note, you're absolutely right about like essentially the wignats and the crazies that are talking about this sort of thing. I think we, more so than anybody else, more so than even the uninitiated to this issue, we detest those people more than anyone else because they make our lives difficult. They make the fact this legitimate political issue that we're trying to disseminate and have serious conversations about and come to serious workable solutions on. They make it impossible to discuss. And that's so difficult sometimes to those who are uninitiated. It's so difficult to stress that, but it's absolutely the case.
Yeah, a particularly frustrating element, I think, is the camouflage that other nefarious people receive when there's this blanket assumption that all things wrong with the world can be safely attributed to the Jews, and then anyone who's not Jewish sort of breathes a sigh of relief and can carry on running their scam or their corruption without a problem. That's another problem in itself. I suppose we have to be careful not to assist that project.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Jared Taylor is probably he's obviously extremely useful in a certain sense that like the Jewish problem, for lack of a better term, I don't want to put it in that sort of way, but the Jewish problem is a single problem, and for my money, it's probably one of the bigger ones, maybe the biggest one, but certainly there's a lot more going on. There's a lot more wrong with society, and yeah, maybe it's even only a symptom of a larger problem, but yeah, he is very and his work is very useful in that sense that like, and maybe that's why some people don't like him, or they don't like the fact that he's like reluctant to discuss Jewish power, just because they are those types of people who want to blame every single problem in the world is because of Jews, and like he makes it so because he's so calm and rational and all this, he makes it so they can't really do that.
I mean, I risk sounding like a Jared Taylor apologist here, when that's not necessary. He's a man who's very capable indeed of speaking for himself. But since I'm here to put the case, even I wouldn't even put it in terms of reluctance. In my experience of speaking with Mr. Taylor, he's very kind of straightforward and direct with me, and with anyone else on this. I think what he does, as far as I can tell, is broadly stick to his area of expertise and knowledge and interest. And having spent several decades drawing really, really important attention to the anti-white narrative and systems, and the stats that just accumulate on interracial conflict of one sort or another. It's such a vast field. It's such a huge body of data to even consider properly describing interracial conflict between whites and non-whites in the United States. Even that one man needs a whole staff to even start chipping away at that block. So I think it's necessary that there are some people focusing on that almost exclusively, and other people, such as yourself, spending a lot more time on, say, Jewish overrepresentation. I personally see no conflict there. I don't feel like taking anyone to task for not spending more time on X, Y, Z, so long as there is a group community sort of effort to collectively get to some truth, some proper understanding. I'm fine with that. But I notice a lot of other people seem dissatisfied in one way or another.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, honestly. Yeah, it's just the whole. I think that is why what I was trying to get at is I think that's why people, sometimes bad talk him, and I think it's completely undeserved. Just because he does not harp endlessly on Jewish stuff. Yeah, to be fair, I am kind of familiar with. I mean, I've watched like a ton of his stuff, and I read a lot of like what's published on the Amran website and everything. But that was maybe one of the first times I'd actually heard him discuss just really anything to do with Jewish people at all.
And I think that really is because, left to his own devices, Mr. Taylor sort of focuses on his field of interest and area of expertise. And I'm eager to point out that, just as it's true to say it's rare to hear Mr. Taylor discuss Jewish people, it's even rarer to hear him counter-signal anyone else who is. And I think that's kind of an important thing to include in the description.
Yeah, it's very fair.
But as regarding your own work, I mean, it's a little unfortunate that Ryan Falk alternative hypothesis is not quite along yet. He might just be plying himself with coffee and sort of prepping, but I'm not quite sure what time zone it is for him right now. But he's done a lot of deep dives into IQ, and I'm not sure, Alex, I should ask you, really, are you familiar to any extent with Ryan Falk alternative hypothesis?
No, I know the name, but unfortunately, I'm not super familiar with his work.
So I'm sure if and when he's along, there'll be a lot of stuff you can discuss about your involvement with IQ. I've spent some time speaking with a few people in X platforms who are very interested in IQ and eager to explain it and demystify it. There's obviously a lot of prejudice around it, that a lot of people are worried that any attention paid to IQ comes at the sacrifice of valuing other important human qualities and attributes, and I'm sure that doesn't have to be the case. And when you were investigating Ashkenazi IQ, did you find yourself looking into any other heritable traits besides IQ and stats around those, or would that have ended up becoming just too big of a project?
There was very briefly a sequel to that video planned, where I would delve a lot deeper. The focus was actually going to be on just like twin studies. I think that has been done, but just like in articles, I didn't see like a really high quality, in my opinion, like YouTube video on that. But I don't know. I think I got a little disenchanted with the idea of just constantly harping on IQ. I like when I'm working on a video, I have a 9 to 5. I have a lot of other responsibilities anyhow, just in my life. So the time that I do get to devote, to this project, to Leather Apron Club or whatever, I have to really make sure what I'm doing like meets my goals, which my goals are really nothing other than just do what is best for this right wing movement, and more broadly, just for white people. So I just have to be very choosy. And I don't know. It seems at times like that the IQ discussion, just constantly harping on it, and a lot of what it devolves into is essentially just being mean to black people, you know. um, I just started wondering if it's like the most productive way that I could spend my time. So
It's
anyway, that didn't end up making it.
yeah, it's one of those areas where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, really. You know, it's often said, isn't it, that if you're deprived of knowing anything else about a person and you can just sort of choose one data point, that apparently IQ is the strongest predictor of earnings, at least, if nothing else. But at the same time, you're missing so many other things you care about, you know, agreeability or predisposition to violence or whatever you might be concerned with.
Mhm.
I'd like to see a similar eagerness that a lot of people have in investigating IQ now, just applied to a broader range of traits, um, especially as they might relate to public policy when it comes to immigration. We have I'm sure you're aware of Elon Musk posting about child rape gangs in the UK, which are overwhelmingly Pakistani. And there seems to be pretty much zero discussion about whether there might be any heritable traits that are relevant to that particular group, because that's just it's probably illegal to even have that conversation in the UK now, I would imagine.
Is it that bad over there? Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with it, just in like kind of people's musings about it on X.
Sure.
Yeah,
But mhm.
there is, I don't know, in like maybe a video talking about like heritability through the twin studies would still be interesting. A lot of those studies they delve into IQ, and that's one of like the main factors that they look at, where you know identical twins raised apart, they will have, you know, within like 1 or 2 IQ points of each other, and they'll have a lot of the same.
Oh yes, the
Interesting.
Minnesota twin adoption studies, you mean? I think, yeah.
Yeah, that's the big one. And I mean, there's a number of even ones besides that. And I mean, part of the reason uh, one of the groups of studies that made me kind of like want to focus on other things was, it's not to say like I'm afraid of touching the subject, or that I'm offended by it or anything. But you know, there are those studies of white children that are raised by black families and vice versa, adopted children, and it invariably ends up being the case that the white child, because they'll go to a typically predominantly like black school, the white child ends up outperforming all of his peers, and the black child in the white school ends up underperforming as compared to all of his peers. You know, so there is an important, obviously, point in there about like, you know, genetics to a large extent is who we are. Our genetics define who we are. And maybe that's not stressed enough. And I think a video with that sort of thrust to it would still be cool. Would still be very important to make. Um, it is hard to do without just coming across like as someone who's making like bait content for Wignats, you know.
Yes, that is the tightrope, isn't it? And yet it's not a problem that can be solved by simply withdrawing from these projects and suspending them, because things will tick on otherwise. Other people will run and acquire the momentum you might have had in a more sensible way. What worries me is, well, how do we proceed? There's clearly a kind of, without being dramatic, there's clearly a kind of breakdown of society across Europe and in many parts of the States. There are clear problems, social economic problems. Mass immigration clearly has not worked as a sort of experiment in Europe, and we're now experiencing. It's not really a question of whether this is being rejected or whether it will be rejected, but how, the manner in which it's being rejected. You know, there are calls on the right, of course, for mass remigration, and there needs to be a level-headed approach to assessing the genetic makeup of populations. It can't be shirked anymore. We can't simply pretend that these geographically isolated groups of people that develop differently physiologically and inevitably then ended up with different brains, given how much we know what percentage of DNA is used building brains. It, depending on exactly which professor you listen to, it's 84%, something of that sort. So the fact we've got clear phenotypic demonstrable differences between racial groups on the planet should incline us to expect there to be neurological differences, and yet we're basically paralyzed from investigating them or commenting on them. And that it's only people such as you who can talk about something of this sort and stay within, say, the YouTube terms of service, that gives us a chance of a broad audience making progress with these topics. Otherwise, it's either left to tyrannical states to silence all conversation, or violent wignats to go stomping around being violent about things, and neither of those seem like a sort of solution to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I just as I'm talking about it again, and I haven't thought about this for uh, quite a few months, but you probably could walk a fine line and get that video out in a sensible way. Um, one of the biggest hurdles, honestly, just for me personally, is just having time for it. Like I've had so many setbacks just working on this website. And this is just like the one project of many that I would love to make. But talking about Jewish overrepresentation, um, just I've had a number of people like ghost me on this project, and a number of other setbacks on it, and like that, in addition to like the limited time I've had to devote to it, it's taken me like a year to get this thing done. And it's not a incredibly complex website. There's it's a little bit more than just basic views going on, but that's another like huge hurdle. Because I agree with what you're saying. It's just I need like an eccentric millionaire to come in and just just back me to my job.
Can relate, yes. I'm so far my time on X, and to the extent I'm involving myself in spaces and trying to have interesting, productive conversations with people such as yourself. Yeah, that's entirely a spare time hobby thing. So I know a little bit about what that's like. I have a notebook in front of me. I'm going to start using it because things will slip my mind. One thing though that seems clear is, if you have a network of people and they have ties both that are religious, genetic, cultural, and they are allowed to have that identity and celebrate that, and they are now pitched against another group who are not allowed to have a collective identity and demonized when they do so, who don't have a common religious identity overlapping that as well, then that's asymmetric warfare, so to speak. I shouldn't use the word warfare. That's an asymmetric situation. Clearly, warfare is a metaphor there, although in danger of sounding as though it's a literal description. I don't intend it that way. So these groups don't have to be opposed, but to the extent that one group has the opportunity to subvert the other, or exploit the other, instead of looking at this through sort of vengeful, moralistic gnashing of teeth terms, could I ask you this, Alex? Could you imagine that if white people, if European people, and Americans and Australians of European stock were to rediscover a collective racial consciousness, racial identity, do you think that in itself might arm them with enough robustness to then not have to be too concerned with, say, for example, Jewish overrepresentation, that would then naturally start to sort of correct? We would start to be more inclined to have guests on our podcast that are of our people and so on. Is that one way to solve the problem?
Uh, Surely. I mean, yeah, that would be what is the root cause. Yeah, it's the soccer analogy of 20 people playing as individuals are going to lose to a team of even 5 playing together. But that's the big ask. That's how do you do that? That's all of what we're trying to accomplish. Yeah, I mean, certainly, yeah. If we could have these sort of maybe not legally written in black and white, but like subtle cultural practices in terms of like hiring and association. Like I think certainly that if we could do that, everything else would really more or less fall into place. It might be a bit more difficult in places, like the U.S., which for my money is maybe even already minority white, and if not, it's approaching that. Certainly, the generations being born now are minority white. Yeah, obviously, if we could lay that foundation, if we could get there, but that's almost the end goal, and getting there is the problem.
Yes, yes. At least in the States, it seems there's some appreciation that is a problem, if not the problem. In the United Kingdom, I'm somewhat embarrassed to say, well, if I'm correct in my assessment, part of the problem is there's still a substantial portion of the population who don't even realize what the problem is, let alone have a willingness to then begin investigating who's behind it. There are still perfectly programmed, propagandized people in the UK who will just find any other explanation than race, no matter how clearly the racial conflict is placed in front of them. That seems such a huge part of the problem. But in Australia and in the US, it seems more of a practical, strategic problem. What about more current projects, Alex? If there's, I realize there's this the website that you've alluded to a number of times. Perhaps I should ask you something more specific about that. What I imagine you would discover in assembling that kind of database is, please correct me if I'm wrong, you're going to come across a lot of people who are plugged into a network which will begin to look like a Jewish network or a proxy for a Jewish network. But you're going to inevitably find, I suppose, a substantial number of people who are not Jewish, but who seem to benefit from membership to this network. I wonder how that's sort of mapping out.
Yeah, well, so a lot of that, it's difficult to, if you're talking about like more nebulous connections like that, that's difficult to put in a database, so to speak. Um, I think a lot of that stuff like that is going to be what people, the conclusions that people can draw, given the data and the tools that I'm putting in this website in order to analyze it. At its core, you have basically a giant table of all these individuals with tons of supporting data. So biography, other basic biographical information like date, date of birth, place of birth, country, nationality, things like that. And the other big portion of it is you have what I'm calling studies, which are things that I have gone in and done. Things like, when I made my Joe Rogan video. And essentially what that'll do is just assign a tag to any of those individuals who have been on Joe Rogan's podcast. And then what you can do with that is there is a collage generating portion of the website that anybody will be able to use, where you can look at either these pre-made groups. So for instance, you can just click a button and everybody who's been on Joe Rogan is already cataloged, and it will generate a collage in which you can look at the Jewish overrepresentation. So, it's a little bit like in the style of those. You've seen things like it where like people make those collages pointing out Joe Biden's cabinet is such and such percentage Jewish or whatever. So those things will be automatically generated. In addition, this may not be available on launch. It's kind of already programmed in, but I want to slowly roll out features. But users will be able to take just a list, just like a new line delimited list of names, and just create these things on the fly. The assumption being that most, if not all, public figures will be available in the database. And if the public figure is not in the database, then users can also contribute new entries. But so the idea of this is going to be like kind of what I'm envisioning is you can be trolling through X and you'll see a post of like, oh, hey, we're having this conservative political conference and there's going to be 30 some odd speakers there. Here's a list of all their names. You could go in, copy paste all those names, and in like 30 seconds turn around and say, oh, well, 52% of these people that you're hosting are Jewish. What do you think this means? And just like hit that in the comments of that post or whatever. In that way, that was a very roundabout way to say that is sort of going to be the way in which we can study and introduce to people this idea of a larger Jewish network, a network of Jewish people. Again, it's and you can suss out stuff like that yourself. Also, there's going to be ways to for every individual. There is also a section of connections. So whether that is connections to family members or to associates that they've worked with, whatever, you will have hyperlinks to those people. It will describe their connection, and then you can continue down the web sort of like that. I wish I had just like the introductory sort of video that I'm planning to make out already. This would make a lot more sense if I could like show you guys all. But
no, you're doing a great job of describing what you're talking about so far, at least. I have a question though. Have you had conversations with people about setting it up such that an AI can crawl it, can access it, and then people can kind of extract data perhaps with excuse me, natural language kind of queries and that kind of thing?
So, as far as an AI trolling the data, no, or scraping anything from it. I do, given the nature of the website, I don't know if I'll eventually have hosting issues. So, basically, to get the data disseminated as widely as possible, I'm going to have it available for download just on the website, the data of all the individuals. So then maybe I could eventually even open source the actual code for the website itself so people can host it themselves, and we can get it widely disseminated that way. The data will be free to download, or you can also give a donation. So I'll probably have like a donate a couple bucks or whatever it is to get the latest version of the data, or I'll have it up in a torrent, like a peer-to-peer somewhere. But yeah, the goal being, I just want to get this like spread out as widely as possible. And then whatever you want to do with it from that point, like if you want to make browser extensions that, I know the coincidence detector already exists, but certainly something like that could very trivially be spun up on something like this. You can go wild with it. You can make Discord bots if you if you want a somewhat anti-Semitic Discord bot to do something, whatever. Do whatever you want with it.
But
point
but
is
all
to have it
joking
as
aside,
easily accessible as possible.
it sounds fun. But all joking aside, I realize you're saying anti-Semitic there, sort of tongue in cheek, because really, there's
Yeah.
no reason in principle that if I were a Jewish person, this might be quite valuable to me. Because if I'm arguing contrary and I'm saying to somebody, look, no, I'm not involved in this industry as a beneficiary of Jewish power and influence and networking. I'm here off my my own back, my own XYZ. Well, that claim is a claim that's much easier to validate in the presence of your database. This Jewish person can go and look, go and check, see, I'm right. So there's no reason it should be inherently any more anti or pro-Semitic in itself. It's simply a database of facts, I suppose.
Yeah, of course. And it's trite to say, but I do of course agree. I don't hate Jewish people. I even know I even know one or two Jewish people. No, seriously, I mean I do, and they're fine people. Certainly, as much as the Wignats will hate this as well, it is not the case that it is like, there is a subset of Jewish people. There is a large, call them the Zionist lobby, the Jewish lobby more broadly, I think is probably a more accurate term. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily incriminate all Jewish people. And like, I know that's a line people don't, they think it's trite. They think it's stupid to say that, but it does have to be said. And I think stressed that we really don't hate Jewish people. I have nothing necessarily against them. But yeah, at the same time, you can recognize that it is obviously the case there is extreme Jewish overrepresentation. There is a Jewish lobby, and they have ethnic interests that they pursue strongly. That is the official statement, and this will all be spelled out in very, I don't want to say lawyerly, but very professional sort of language on the about page of this website, just to stress to people that this is very serious. I take data integrity very seriously, so I'm not going to, basically, I take very seriously a non-Jewish person being labeled as Jewish, or vice versa. Probably more the latter, actually. It's probably a worse mistake of the data. So actually, with that in mind, anybody who is labeled Jewish on the website, I require a source to point out why that person is Jewish. And this ideally has to be a primary source from the person themselves. So they're very strict sort of data integrity system set up on here.
It just sounds like a very valuable tool for so many reasons. Inevitably, in some sort of fantasy day of reckoning where all of the bad people are somehow identified and the world is put to rights, inevitably a very large number of people that have absolutely nothing to do with Jews would be present there. Right now, I'm quite sure there are huge numbers of non-Jewish people doing very terrible, evil, corrupt things in the world, and therefore the idea that simply doing away with Jews will solve the world's problems, it's not going to be difficult to show that that's false. It's your database is going to be a database of people, not just of Jewish people, if I understand correctly. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. So right now I have I'm sitting at like 1.1 million entries for people, and I looked just yesterday. I double checked and I made like a post about it. About 3% of them are Jewish, which is very
Okay.
surprising. So a million or so of those names, they are also on Wikipedia, and they represent essentially all the pages, individual articles about people, living people on Wikipedia. And yeah, a very small percentage of them are Jewish. Um, I don't know. I think people would expect that to be not necessarily the case, just given how prevalent the early life check is. When you go to Wikipedia, at least me personally, when I go to Wikipedia to check something, oftentimes the person is Jewish. But yeah, it's a remarkably small percent.
So is the correct take from that the bar for receiving a Wikipedia entry is far lower than the bar for being considered to be a sort of an influential person in the modern world?
Yeah, I don't understand. That's absolutely the case. The number of articles on Wikipedia that like genuinely are about Pakistani cricket players from the 80s, it's insane. And they supposedly maintain, I don't know if these are old articles and they have since changed their standards for notoriety to be actually like made into an article. But the number of articles that are just about absolutely just very not famous people, not not notable people at all. It's off the charts. I don't know if it's 30-40% of the articles about people on Wikipedia are just nonsense. So that certainly skews the percentage down. Typically, these articles about Jewish people are going to be much longer, so they're going to be more notable people.
Well, this is deeply interesting stuff. Now, one of my best friends has quite a lot of knowledge on Wikipedia. He might be along. He often co-hosts with me in Australia, but he's what time is it now? Gosh, Sydney. Okay, he might just about be getting out of bed. We also have alt hype with us now. The alternative hypothesis. Ryan is here, at least as a listener. I've sent him an invite, but the UI with X is a little on the flaky side, so I can't be sure he will have seen that, even if he is not AFK. I will just send him a quick DM. Sending you invites, and you see. There we go. In the meantime, you obviously have had to do some thinking ahead, Alex, because famously, people involving themselves with drawing attention to any privileged or elite group, would be they Jewish or anybody else, these people tend to be especially good at shielding themselves and deflecting and have money to spend on lawyers and this kind of thing. So I imagine you probably have come across one or two teething troubles on the way. If there's anything you want to share or you feel able to share, that might be interesting. Ryan is up as a speaker as well. I'm going to be passing over to him in just a moment.
Oh, yeah. I mean, feel free to pass over to him. It has, I mean, granted, I'm like a Z-list YouTuber. So yeah, with the exception of, going out to,
By the way,
right.
Alex, sorry to interrupt you so early. I only mean hand over to him to the extent he can put some questions to you. I don't, in any by any means, intend to let you go here.
Oh yeah, no, I'll stick around anyways. Yeah, no, I really haven't faced anybody pushing back or no death threats. No, obviously I'm not doxxed or anything, so nothing like that. I don't get recognized out in public. It might be disappointing, but yeah, nothing really has come of it negatively.
And you seem like quite a solid chap in your video where you were measuring people's grip strength and what have you. I notice you standing above most of the people in the video, so you're not such a casual target for noodly armed Antifa people to come and take a swing, I suppose.
Yeah. I'm like, I say I'm 6'1". I think most accurately I'm like 6'1.5", but that sounds like I'm like 5'11". So yeah, the grip strength thing was a lot of fun. I think if the Groypers or want to invite me to something like that again, it'd be a lot of fun. And I got an actual digital dynamometer to test grip strength. I think that would be fun to bring it and do like a bit more of even like a scientific breakdown and get like an actual a decent sample size anyhow, and just like look at it. Not as a means of like hazing or anything. It's just it's fun. It's a thing that's a lot of fun to do when you're sitting around with a group of guys. It's like astrology for guys. It's a lot of fun.
Well, talking of getting a grip on scientific breakdowns, that seems like a very suitable moment to say hello to Ryan Falk, the Alternative Hypothesis. Please meet Alex, Leather Apron Club.
Good to meet you, sir.
Oh. You may have some mic issues there. If you want to try and unmute and talk again, Ryan, I can see your mic unmuting, but I couldn't hear you. Alex, are you able to hear Ryan at the moment?
I cannot, no.
Okay. He's just fixing some audio issues at the moment. By the way, just to make you aware, Ryan, I know you don't use X spaces very often, but this can be a glitch with a space. It might not be your audio setup. So if it persists, I will drop you down to listener, bring you back up. That often fixes the problem. Yeah, Ryan's down as a listener. Okay. But yeah, where were we, Alex? IQ databases, you not receiving death threats, groypers and grip strength. Oh yes, well, so you've had some opportunity to involve yourself with the groyper community. Have you stayed in touch with any of them since your interactions then, I wonder?
A few of them, I think that I met in there sometimes send me messages on Twitter. Yeah, maybe not super well in touch with any of them. But yeah, I consider myself friendly towards them. I think Fuentes is a really smart guy, solid guy. That's one thing that not even about the groypers in particular, but there's so much infighting and like dirt flinging among the people in like this weird online right niche, and I just find it all really childish and unnecessary. And I don't know, like maybe it's just people falling prey to the culture of dunking on other people and on X, but especially when it happens between two right wing people, it's just very, very cringy, very, very awful. So yeah, with that in mind, I mean, yeah, I would love to remain friendly to the groypers, to really anybody. I think we need all the quality people we can get.
Definitely here to that. It can take cringy, unnecessary forms, and there are other, I think, more sort of sensible, understandable forms where people have different audiences and they have to sort of maybe split in some sense, even though they're kind of on the same team. I think it can be done in a more or less mature way. But talking of maturity, Ryan Falk, Alternative Hypothesis. Hypothesis. Second attempt.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yes. Do go ahead.
Oh, good. I don't know why you keep hyping me up like maturity. I actually just came back from meeting with my mom. That's why I'm late. And I don't have anything to say. You guys are talking about you guys are talking about all this like smart stuff, and I'm just like, hey, I'm just like coming in. There's probably listeners who know more about what's going on than me.
Well, look, Ryan, something you definitely do know about is Alex what I hope is perhaps putting you guys in touch so that you, with your field of expertise in AI and playing with that, maybe you could point one of your AIs at Alex's database before it fully goes online, so it can see if it can extract any super interesting stuff from it that you might want to know about.
Oh, okay. I mean, sure. You can just send me. Is it like in a CSV or like a?
I do have a CSV I can send you. Yeah.
Okay.
It won't hold all the rows. I think there's a size limit on CSVs, but yeah. Are you a developer?
No. I'm more of a. Well, I'm an autodidact. Like I have I can do some JSON and Node.js and
in fact, look, Ryan, you're being
I've read guides.
You're being deprived
I've read
here.
guides and set up like APIs and stuff, but that's all.
Ryan, let me give you the same chance that Alex and Jared Taylor had. Ryan, would you please be kind enough for anyone not familiar with your work to give us a sort of broad, in a nutshell, what you've been doing for a few years and who you are? Because some people won't be familiar with that. Most people will.
Oh, okay. So I guess to start off with like HBD, long time ago. But since then, I don't know really how to describe it. I've done stuff on a lot of things. Like recently, I've done a little dive on like the Jewish population and how like basically Jewish population estimates are kind of have been kind of BS, and how like there probably weren't how basic. So it. I don't know. I don't know where to even begin. Like like
if you want to begin with perhaps the specifics of the population investigation, I could maybe, after you finish with that, give people a quick, in a nutshell, account of some of the other things you've done.
Okay, like, but is that allowed? Because basically I'm saying that there were probably about 14.5 million Jews after 1945. So, like, it's basically.
Well, I will simply say that the views and opinions expressed by speakers may not reflect those of other speakers or the host, and everyone's words are their own. And it's a free speech platform. People may draw safe, responsible, well-informed conclusions at a pace suitable for them.
Okay, but I think just more generally, what I'm particularly interested in is why people believe things like why argumentation doesn't work. Like what's the real reason people believe things? And I think it ultimately gets down to undue confidence and due diligence of certain platforms. You know, Wikipedia being one of them, and which is why the deconstruction of Wikipedia is a good thing. I spend most of the time deconstructing like what a lot of people think about academics and the universities, because that's what shitlibs generally believe their beliefs to be based on, is sort of an academic consensus, even if it's not. That's what they believe it to be, right? Basically, they have incredible confidence in sort of their beliefs, because they believe it comes from like these truth towers. Even if they don't, even if you actually break down academic consensus and it's not exactly as in line as they thought, that's where they think it comes from, and that's why it's really important to deconstruct them. And so that's one of the things that I do. One thing I'm doing now is I'm doing a big long thing looking into the certain events that occurred in the 1940s. That is a thing I'm doing now. But it starts with like kind of a deep dive on this idea of the Russians in England, which is where there was a mass belief in Britain that about 250,000 Russian troops were traveling through the UK. And there's something like over 5,000 recorded reports in this paper that I'm looking at. And that's just recorded reports. And this is from an event from a long time ago that's been forgotten. That wasn't that. So in terms of how many people were actually saying this, is almost certainly going to be a lot more. But you had things like train conductors saying this. You had British military officers confirming this. You had prostitutes saying that they slept with the Russian troops that have been traveling through England. You had basically all manner. You had politicians. You had the local press confirming. You had the Italian press confirming. And you had German intelligence fooled by this, thinking that there were, in fact, somewhere on the order of 250,000 Russian troops traveling through the UK towards the Western Front. And that actually, something that's actually kind of forgotten, is that they actually delayed their advance through Belgium for a few days, the Germans did, until they figured out that it was a hoax. In fact, they were even getting reports from German troops on the ground saying, we've come into contact with Russian troops. Explanation is that they actually came into contact with Belgian troops, which had a rather unique kind of helmet. But that's and so it's like lots of little things like that to kind of show that this convergence thing, which is the basis of a particular event, is not exactly that exotic. It's not that but basically it's not that rare to have. It's not that impressive to have, say, 10,000 people all saying that they saw roughly the same thing, right? And, aside from like, needling testimony to say, oh, you got the time and the date wrong or whatever. But it's not that impressive. Like convergence is not that impressive, is what I'm saying. You also had convergence with like the whole Iraq WMD things. You had eyewitnesses. You had defectors saying that they were working in the weapons programs and that they've seen the stockpiles. You had investigators saying, "Oh, here's a sign of stockpiles here." And so, basically, what I'm doing now is I'm deconstructing convergence and sort of collective mass belief in a thing as not being nearly as impressive as as certain historians think it is regarding events from the 1940s.
Would it even be fair to say that convergence is really what we should expect in the absence of anything? Because there is some social penalty in deviating from the convergent, widely held belief, and basically no penalty for sticking with it. And so therefore we should expect convergence.
Yeah, in fact, I actually, I don't know how to like make this argument in a way that would convince somebody who's heel dug in, but just from my thinking, I've actually thought that perhaps, like, if you have mass amounts of stories about a thing, that may be, to some extent, that may actually be a bad thing and be suspicious. Because if you say have, like, if an event is generally unknown and you're just looking at it directly and you're limited to, say, physical evidence for a thing, or like one or two accounts, if there's a lack of physical evidence, then what you're not getting is a what is called a social contagion effect, right? Whereas if you have thousands and thousands of people saying, "Oh yeah, I saw the boogeyman," then that's possibly a social contagion effect. So you're adding another avenue for a thing being wrong if you have if an event is becoming like a popular sort of story, like the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, where it was something that at least 25 people reported being accosted by this Mad Gasser, and police were looking around for the Mad Gasser. And there was also, that was Mattoon, Illinois, and there was also another event of a roaming gas prowler who would gas people in Virginia as well. And so that's another example of convergence. And the thing is, if it's just with the Mad Gasser, which is a more humorous and smaller scale event, if you were to actually like what I was thinking is, what if there was a Wikipedia article that went out? Actually, this would be better for the Russians in England. If you had a Wikipedia article out that talked about the Russians in England and documented the travel of 250,000 Russian troops going through England, at the bottom of the wiki page, you see like basically the source flood at the bottom, and like you could fill up a respectable sort of source flood thing at the bottom of the wiki page to say that there were in fact Russians in England, because there's plenty of accounts. You can fill it up many times over for this event that did not happen. And so if you had an article on that, let's say that the British government did not come out and deny it. And the German government, not only did the German government believe that they existed, they believed that their troops had made contact with the Russian troops in Belgium. So if you were going to go in and try to like refute such an article, how would you even begin? Right? And that's sort of the kind of argument that I'm trying to develop here. How would you even begin to refute the Russians in England? Or if we go to something people might know more about, how would you go about refuting the existence of WMDs in Iraq if the United States government insisted that they found them and had like big displays saying, "Oh, look, here's the nuclear weapons plant, here's the uranium cake, everything we said was going to be there, we found it," and they took little pictures of it, and that went on to like a Wikipedia article and had all these citations, infinite number of citations, more than any one person could ever possibly look into. How would you go about refuting that? And basically, that's the point, is that you shouldn't be expected to have to do something like that. And that's kind of what I see, the holy fire to be. So
Ryan, the ease with which it's possible to assemble falsehoods like that it's particularly clear when you look at the way people then get over the lie. When the claim was made and everyone went along with it, that was just sort of widely accepted. And now the official position is no, Tony Blair was an evil bastard, and the WMDs were a complete lie. I've noticed that, well, it's pretty hard to really find much in the way of sources there. There's Dr. Marty Obeiddy's book, The Bomb in My Garden, that Christopher Hitchens often used to talk about, whereby the coalition discovered they arrested Dr. Obeiddy, and he led them to his rose bushes under which they were buried the nuclear centrifuges for enriching weapons-grade uranium. And apparently the plans for long-range delivery systems, but I'm not quite sure how much store to set on that. But if you actually have conversations with people about this, pretty much no one ever brings that up. So the ease with which they accepted the lie is similar to the ease with which they dispense with it. It's convergence, as you say, that seems to suck people in whatever direction rather than a particular curiosity with the truth or facts.
It's also weird just how one thing I also was thinking about was like how quickly the shift came with the WMDs. It's like, oh, not here. Guess what? None of that was ever true all along. So it's a weird, but who says that? How does the switch get flipped where people go from believing in a thing to no longer believing in a thing? For example, with the Russians in England, we can sort of see the switch, which is that on November 18th, 1914, British House something committee, press committee, the existence of Russian troops in France and Belgium. And so, but for the WMDs, how did that happen where sort of the flip was switched? And recently, apparently, the Rotherham thing is now just starting to be admitted to have happened, but admitted to have happened by who? How do these narrative switches just get flipped? It's very weird, and I'm not exactly sure how that coordination comes about and how it happens so fast.
The interesting thing in the UK there is not just so much that it's flipped, it's more that it was acknowledged as a thing that happened since 2013 when that whatever that lady was, OBE, produced her report, the Rotherham report, that's available as a download. I linked to it in a tweet recently. So we've known about it since then, but it seems that till very recently,
lost him?
Oh, are you able to hear me there, Alex? Oh, Alex, can you hear me? Ryan, can you hear me?
I don't know if we've lost you or I've lost it.
Okay, Ryan, can you tell Leather that you can hear me, and I'm going to drop him down and bring him back up as a speaker?
Yeah. Leather, I can hear you. You need to come back up. He's dropping you down, and he's going to bring you back up.
Yeah, I'm just going to drop him a quick DM. I was going to ask him about whether he's come across anything related to history, sort of having to support the narrative that today any Jewish overrepresentation is explained by XYZ. He must have noticed the way that a particular historical narrative is sort of placed there as a barrier to anyone that might want to investigate real Jewish overrepresentation today. He's probably had one or two experiences with that. In the meantime, HT Handsome Truth has graced us with his presence. Maybe HT, have you met Ryan before, HT? Alternative hypothesis. If not, please say hi to each other, guys.
Hello. No, I don't think we've met.
Leather Apron Club is back. Let me just... Excellent. I think he's here. Hello. Are you able to hear us, Alex?
Yep, I can hear you. Seems like X flaked out again.
It did. Alex, since Ryan's had spent some time looking over historical narratives regarding World War II and so on, I suppose you may have encountered people that have placed in your path a particular narrative, a particular version of events from World War II, and sort of put that there as a prohibition against investigating even Jewish overrepresentation, as if you're treading on the toes of the dead somehow. Have you come across sort of much of that?
I mean, I wish I had some more interesting story, but really very few people have. Maybe I just ignore them, or I'm a little bit more difficult to find. But yeah, I don't stir the pot really, and nobody really interferes with me. Now, granted, being on YouTube, I'm not going to touch a topic like that. And as much as you could deal with it in a sort of level-headed, down-to-earth way, it's just not possible. But yeah, no, nobody's tried to Holocaust guilt me about. I'm sure there's been the odd comment or two, but I couldn't care less. So.
I mean, that's something you and Alt Hype have in common, that you've unusually been able to sort of walk the line on YouTube and operate within those TOS, which is really impressive these days. They are squeezing people so hard there. Both of you,
Yeah, I think it'd be great to get one of those 100,000 subscriber plaques before getting kicked off anyhow. Not that I'm aiming for that to get kicked off, but I think that'd be a cool achievement.
Yeah, I would like for. Yeah, I would like for Twitter to somehow, like there is a market to compete with YouTube, and like BitChute is not it. But like Twitter can be it. So it's just maddening that Elon Musk does not seem to be interested in doing the proper competition with YouTube.
Yeah, you're talking about like,
and to a certain extent, Twitch.
You mean like have a landing page like YouTube where you can just click on videos and view them?
Yeah, like a proper, like be able to make a proper video platform. Because right now, if you post a video on Twitter, it's like hidden in your feed, and you have very limited ability to control what is at the top of your feed on Twitter. Like you can have like a pinned post, but that's really about it. So, like you can't set up a video shop basically, which is what YouTube channels are. They're like video shops, and yeah,
it's tantalizing. You have the 3 tabs: post, replies, and media. And if only you could click on media and it would show you like a YouTube video landing page. They're sort of so almost there. And maybe over the next few years that will just sort of organically happen, because I notice people are hosting video X spaces now quite often, doing streams on X. So
do those get any views at all though?
Well, I have noticed people that make them complain about no, but something could be done about that perhaps. I mean, organically, something will, I think, because YouTube is just becoming unpalatable, isn't it? People are going to even put up with glitchy UIs and things, I think, just to have more of a free speech experience, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, just maybe it's a technical problem for them. As much as they seem capable, they do have issues with even X spaces. And I think the hosting problem of being a dedicated video hosting platform of that scale is, I don't know what X infrastructure looks like anyways, but I suspect they'd have to significantly scale up. Like what percentage of internet traffic is just YouTube videos? I know someone did like a study on that years back, and it's a significant percentage of all internet traffic. So I think Twitter or X is a lot more humble in size.
I think the fact that X has this premium monetized model gives them a real opportunity, though, because as well as making money, it's a natural filter on how much bandwidth is being sucked up. If the only people you allow to upload long videos are people paying you for the privilege, you've kind of got, that might offset the bandwidth costs, perhaps.
Yeah, and it would be, well, this is maybe a bad thing to say. It also may be a good barrier to entry.
Well, yes. I mean,
it's a small barrier. It's a small barrier to entry, but it may be but having a barrier to entry that small will prevent it'll prevent it'll prevent some of the lowest quality. It'll filter out maybe about half of all video uploaders that would be like the lowest quality, we'll say.
I mean, Alex and yourself even, Ronnie, you're relatively young people, but I'm old enough to remember when just the internet was a kind of filter where anyone who could work a computer and get the internet working was probably quite clever. And that was a nice, effective filter for a few years. So, yeah, maybe X with its glitchiness and premium cost can be something like that.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, what would even become of it? Would it just become another Rumble or something?
I mean, I suppose the model would be that it would be something
Yeah.
like a YouTube, but without all the restrictions.
Yeah, I mean, just like in terms of content,
Right.
people are going to want to post politics. It seems. I mean, maybe I'm skewed
Yeah.
in what I
So
see. Go ahead.
Yeah. So like Rumble, except that Rumble, like, but the thing is, Rumble is not Twitter, right? Rumble is not like a main website on the internet, whereas Twitter is. So.
I'm pretty optimistic about Twitter upping their video content, or that naturally happening over the next few years. I see it starting to slowly happen now.
Yeah, I mean, here's hoping, but we'll see. Yeah, I don't know.
I was going to ask you though,
YouTube at some point,
but perhaps getting back to the AI thing. I mean, at the moment, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but you haven't taken any opportunity yet to sort of have some natural language LLM thing extract data from your database and make statements about it and stuff.
I like, what sort of statements would you have it make? I guess, like, to be clear, I'm using AI in. It was used extensively in the data gathering. So it was like a combination of lots of different scraping methods, and then it was sort of parsed over by AI and sort of in order to make, summaries, write brief biographies about the people. But like, what are you trying to say that AI would sort of garner from all the data?
Well, in fact, Ryan right here is a much better position than I am to sort of take some educated guesses about what form that might take. I should hand over to him. I think I'm already out of my depth here.
Okay. Well, what are you doing? What's the data set about?
Yeah, so I was talking about it earlier, but essentially a website. I'm going to have a website up to highlight Jewish overrepresentation. So to that end, there is a large data set of individuals, like over 1 million currently, and it highlights a lot of basic biographical information about them, date of birth, things like that. And in addition, it obviously talks about their ethnicity, be it white, black, Jewish, whatever. So, I mean, that would be the main data that people would be interested in anyhow. Now, I mean, what I do with that is look at groups that these people are a part of, in order to just look at the overall Jewish representation of those groups. I don't know what else. I guess your imagination's the limit on what else you can do with it, but that's its goal anyhow.
So once you've already done that, I'm not sure what exactly you would want an LLM to do after that.
Well, I don't know. I might be barking up a wrong tree here, Ron, but I remember the experience you've had with them sort of hallucinating. I wonder if they might generate some interesting hallucinations being fed that data set.
They hallucinate all the time. Freaking very funny story. In generating the data, so you can specify like, hey, I want a JSON response object. But for ethnicity, I was like, all right, describe their ethnicity and use only one of these categories: white, black, Jewish, Southeast Asian, whatever. There are like a dozen or so. And so those, I said, like, literally, these are the only things you can possibly respond with. And consistently, if the person was Irish or Italian, they would not put white, they would not put black, but they would put Irish or Italian as just like a, I don't know. The bots got like, 19th century sensibilities about like what makes somebody white or not. But
yeah,
I thought that was super funny.
They're not programs. They're not like traditional programs.
Yeah. No, it's just funny. I don't know where it kind of got that idea that like, yeah, this person is Italian. Well, I can't exactly label him white, so we'll just put Italian. Yeah, they're quirky. I had to do a lot of like cleanup of the data and stuff afterwards. But
so you found that.
Sorry, Ryan, go ahead.
So you found that Jews are 3% of the who's who or whatever of
yeah, I mean, so that's, I just posted that yesterday. That's like a very insignificant finding, but yeah, I was just saying 3% of the articles about people on Wikipedia are about Jewish people. Yeah, it really doesn't mean anything. Again, the point is, I'm going to be looking at, governmental organizations, NGOs, certain groups in the media, maybe like the board or the chairs of certain media organizations, and just looking at the Jewish representation of those groups. Yeah, the percentage that of Wikipedia that it's Jews, that's kind of a meaningless stat, just kind of interesting. Yeah,
I mean,
you can look to. I posted a comment in under this space post, and it's just a collage of. I stripped the title out, but essentially, this is a collage of former employees of Goldman Sachs. And that is actually a list from Wikipedia. So I didn't grab these lists of names, but I just took them in, essentially put them into my my website. And one of its sort of key features is that it can generate these collages, and it's just a way to sort of highlight Jewish overrepresentation. So
how hard would it be to make fake Wikipedia articles, not on Wikipedia, but on a wiki-like thing?
That's kind of what I have for each of these people. So this is obviously just a screenshot, or it's an exported JPEG of the collage that the website generates. But if you're on the website, you can click on each of these people, and it brings you to a bio page of them. Right now, it's just text because I'm concerned about having to pay for too much storage on the website. But I would, if I could get a little bit of funding on it, like to expand it to have like rich media and images and videos that are relevant to that person. But
yeah. So I just got a thought about if we made wiki-like articles, and the point of these things would be more as a demonstration of basically Wikipedia articles that are completely about an event or a thing that isn't real or didn't happen. And the point of these demonstrations wouldn't be to, claim that event happened. It would be to show just how impossible it would be for the average Joe to ever argue against such a thing, right? That basically, if it gets a Wikipedia article made about it, it as a persuasion technique is what I'm thinking. And, it would involve sort of a little bit of imagination on the part of the viewer to imagine this is a real article, and what would it be like to try to debunk, try to debunk that there are Russians in England if the British government did not say so, if the British government did not deny that they were there eventually. How would you even begin, right? Because you have all this convergence of evidence. How would you even begin to try to argue against such a thing, right?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting concept. It's kind of highfalutin of how can you even verify history? Yeah, it's an interesting examination to me. Obviously, the implications of what you could dive.
I don't know. We're talking about two totally different things, and you were talking about Wikipedia, and so I just thought about that.
No, I get you. Yeah, it kind of flows. I get it.
I mean, what might be a source of confusion for some people listening as well, that I should point out, is the broad separation between the sort of the environment and the nature nurture camps, let's say. You can look at bees and you can study which bees the other bees allow into the hive and not, and it's basically based on genetic relatedness. So bees from their group get in, and bees that don't. And it's the neuroarchitecture of bees isn't especially complicated, certainly not stood next to humans. So it's not. So if bees can do it, we should expect ourselves to be able to do that. And therefore, the same thing that makes you run in the burning building to rescue your children and over some random person's child, there are these expanding circles of genetic interest that you're more closely related to your grandchildren and even your neighbors, your village, compared to etc. So we would naturally expect these fields of genetic interest to be reflected in our social political arrangements, all things remaining equal. And when you look at Jewish, or in fact any matrix, any network, any elite, you're going to be looking for genetic relatedness and whatever other networks you're concerned with, be they religious or social or what have you. So having a database of literal relatedness and relatedness of any sort, we're going to hopefully be able to sort of separate out from that. You know, is this a financial network? Is this a religious network? Is this a genetic network? Is there crossover? You know, Venn diagrams will appear, spring up left, right, and center. So these are the kind of investigations I think that some people are interested in. Would that be a fair piece of commentary to add, Alex, and then Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly hope. Like I said, I'm going to make the data as accessible as possible. So if people want to hop in and do whatever sort of analysis on it that they want, that's exactly what it's for. It's not necessarily drawing those itself, as the goal is more just to put the data out there. But yeah, yeah.
And just to be very clear, Alex, I want to be sure I haven't misunderstood. It's not exclusively going to be a database of Jewish people. It's going to be a database of notable, influential people, and at any level, and their ethnicity will then be stated.
Yeah, correct. Probably only 4 or 5% of the people that I have right now in the database are actually Jewish. So you're talking 50,000 some odd people. But yeah, it's essentially just all public figures as a way to look at what is their representation. I need the other people, the non-Jewish people in there to obviously look at their representation in these certain groups. So
Sure. So you have already, I suppose, had fun throwing various hoops around various sets to look at, well, what happens if you look at only, I don't know, Hollywood film directors, or only financiers, or only whatever it is.
Yeah. So I've got a couple dozen I've done so far, and really the sky's the limit. At this point, I've got such a huge data set that you can generate them very quickly. Podcasts, that was kind of like what I started with. So I've got 20 some odd of them. Even just kind of silly things like people. I have one on everybody who's been a guest star on Family Guy. Kind of it's like trivial stuff like that, but obviously these represent like notable people within Hollywood, so it's not totally irrelevant. Personnel at NPR, various Forbes wealthiest lists, as well as like billionaires by country. People who have appeared as sharks on Shark Tank, if you were curious about something like that. I think it's like 30 some odd % of them are Jewish. So yeah, I mean, what you can do with it is it's 33.3%. Yeah, essentially what you can do with it is just limited by your imagination or whatever group you want to look at.
I mean, that sounds funny, but that actually sounds like a pretty good indicator of people, certainly people with connections in terms of being a guest on any show. Like, who are they picking as guests? Because who they're picking as guests is something that's more discretionary than, say, the star actor, for example.
Yeah, that's actually
only for one episode. So
yeah, I was gonna say that's a big thing. Is the word is discretion. It's definitely correct. When you have a scenario where somebody is choosing guests very deliberately, oftentimes you will find that those guests end up being disproportionately Jewish. But when you have a meritocratic system, you find that those people tend to be Jewish in proportion to their percentage of the population, almost always.
It reminds me of the situation in the States a little bit, looking at racial prejudice among policemen. With crimes where you can't use your discretion, so murder, there's a body, you have to deal with it. That's one lot of stats. And then other discretionary crimes where sort of speeding, traffic things where the cop can decide to let people go. Well, if they were really prejudiced, you'd expect white policemen to be pursuing black suspects far more in those discretionary cases. But in fact, you get the opposite. They're more likely to arrest the white guy in those cases. So that is very telling.
Yeah. Sorry, you're going to say something?
Yeah. He basically described it.
Yeah, I have seen those studies where
that's sort of like.
Sorry, I think we're on a delay.
Okay.
I was just going to say I've seen those studies where technically white people who commit similar violent crimes to black people are something like 2 times as likely to end up in a police altercation where they die. And it's probably explainable by inner city cops have to go through a lot more like sensitivity training and de-escalation techniques and things like that, just because they have more killing. So it seems like more of a pronounced problem. Whereas, you know, in a rural place, you might have one killing every couple of years, but technically, statistics wise, it's more prevalent, you know, per capita. Yeah, interesting fact.
And that particular fact is something. That particular fact is something I'm only aware of, having read it in one of Jared Taylor's books. I believe, though, Ryan, you've also looked at a study of simulated shootings where the police weren't told race was an issue, and something emerged from that, if I remember.
Yeah. Well, basically, they took a book, like there's several of like these simulated quick reaction events. I think vaguely there was one where there's a guy coming up from the stairs and he just pops out. There's one where there's a guy going into a car. Like I've written about it somewhere in my mess of archives or whatever. But basically, cops are more trigger happy against whites than blacks. The way they do it is they take a large number of cops, like 100 something, and have one go look at whites and one look at blacks. The idea being that large enough numbers, averages will average out. But basically, cops are more trigger happy against whites than they are against blacks in these simulations. And also the fact that blacks are a higher percentage of cop killers than there's another ratio, like cop killers versus killed by cops. Like blacks are a higher percentage of cop killers than they are of people killed by cops, which is something you would expect from cops being less trigger happy on blacks, right? And of course, what you said previously, that blacks being more overrepresented in homicide than any other crimes. When in reality, like my opinion, this is just my sort of belief, and it's not, and you know, you can make an argument for it, but I don't know how to empirically verify it. The crime rate of an area, the overall crime rate of an area, is the homicide rate of the area. And any deviation from the homicide rate is simply, in terms of comparing different areas. Like an area with a higher homicide has a higher overall crime, is my belief. But if say you have an area that has more murders than robberies reported, what that means to me is that robberies are less reported than they are in, say, another area. But all these things are relative between areas. So that's my view on that. So if you have an entire race where robberies are more reported than, or less reported than murders relative to another race, all that means is that basically black robberies aren't getting reported as much as often as white robberies are relative to what they're doing. Because we know what blacks are doing. We know how many robberies blacks are doing based on how many murders they're doing. That's my belief. Crime stats.
You know, you've just made me think of something, Ryan. Another set of data that might be taken from Alex's database that's nothing to do with Jews, at least directly. You'd have the opportunity also to see how over or underrepresented other groups, sub-Saharan Africans or whatever it might be, and you might discover they have certain networks that aren't transparently obvious just looking through the lens of the media or social media. Perhaps there's stuff to be found there.
Yeah, I mean, it won't come to a surprise to anyone that blacks have on other blacks when they have like shows or podcasts or whatever. That's obviously the case. You know, they're overrepresented like 5 or 6 times. Yeah, and it is funny, I guess, insofar as it's just kind of taken as like a matter of fact that like obviously that's the case. The funny thing about Jewish hosts of various shows and podcasts, or even just, you know, board members of certain companies or whatever, usually white people are not underrepresented, at least in terms of as compared to like the general population. You know, a lot of times you'll have like 50 to 60% white people. Now that might be skewed a little bit because I think non-whites in the US tend to skew a little bit younger. But regardless, it does happen to line up with their overall population. And Jews are massively overrepresented, you know, say 30% for a given company or whatever. And then the rest of the board seats are taken up by, you know, the people of color. So it ends up being the case that Jews aren't necessarily taking seats away from white people at these places, but they are taking seats away from, you know, everybody else, all the other people of color. That's an interesting, just like overall trend that I've observed. But yeah,
Well, it seems like it may be more like at these elite levels, it's like you have a certain degree, of quote unquote meritocracy, and then a certain degree of like nepotism, and then you have the diversity quota. Is it? What do you think? Do you think that's a good rough outline of what's going on?
yeah, it would be a surmising, but yeah, that very well could be the case. You know, who knows?
I wonder to what extent meritocracy and nepotism are like very well aligned. If to basically to the extent that genetic heritability is a thing, then employing your family isn't such a bad thing. If you're a meritocratic person, you're likely to have meritocratic children, at least on average to some extent. I wonder how those things might be extracted.
Yeah, so that's actually a point I made regarding legacies at universities. Um, Basically, like the reality is that legacy applicants to universities are discriminated against, and that actually has to do with like like in the literature how discrimination is defined, right? Like you have some sort of filter, some sort of selection process for people in a thing, a company, a university, a bowling club, whatever. And that selection filter has like criteria, and that criteria is meant to predict certain outcome variables. The problem is that the like basically I forget, I'm doing fuzzy math off of memory. Like for blacks, it's like you're worth 260. You're given like 260 SAT points for free, which basically means that every like basically you have to take down any black person with a degree down like a level or like a standard deviation of universities that they should be at, basically, but or more than that. But in terms of legacies, legacies actually, even though they get something, it's something like 140 SAT points thereabouts. But despite getting a kind of legacy affirmative action, they actually get better grades than non-legacies. So basically, what I'm saying is that like a legacy who comes in with an SAT of 1260 is going to end up having uh, better grades than a non-legacy with an SAT of 1400, right? Which is a pretty wild result, but there it is. And also, of course, SAT correlates with GP. So you for large populations you can use SAT as an indicator of overall criteria for at a population level, right? Because you're not getting big swings from SAT versus how well they did on all other things in high school, except for blacks tend to be a little bit tend to have worse grades relative to their SAT, which actually goes back to sort of what I call trait mountain, right? Which is where if you have a trait that is odd relative to the genetic population you come from, sort of the breeding population you come from, if you have an odd trait in that, your other traits will also be raised to the extent they sort of correlate with that, but they won't raise like linearly. Like for example, if you take a white person with an IQ of 100 and a black person with an IQ of 100, the black person will have more, say, will have a lower time preference. If you take time preference, blacks will have a lower time preference than other blacks, right? As you would expect from their 100 IQ, but they won't have a lower time preference than a white person with an IQ of 100, right? So you think of it like you have two lines and like these mountains jutting out, and these mountains pull up the other traits, right? So that's why I call it trait mountain. I forget what I was even talking about. I was going on wild tangents. I'm sorry, guys.
Well, no, they're not so tangential. I think one metric that might be very useful to have in this data set, but which might be conspicuously or like widely absent anyway, would be either IQ or a proxy for IQ, so that when you assess whatever representation this group has in some field, you can then check that against what you would expect it to have if IQ were the operative factor. Now, rarely will you have, a proper set psychometric test sort of data set available for a person. But I mean, Ryan, you've talked a lot about proxies for IQ, I think, and Edward Dutton's talked about those as well. I think reflex is a good, relatively good proxy for IQ. I think there are others.
You mean reaction time?
Yes.
Reaction time tests?
For example, I just wonder what
Yeah.
if we wanted to get that additional layer of information in Alex's data set, to do with IQ, then what?
That's no, that's not. Well,
ambitious.
Talk to Alex, but I really don't think that's happening.
Slap reaction time as like an additional column in the data.
Yeah, or actual IQ. I mean, if you could slowly accumulate some IQ scores for these people over time, might eventually 1,000 years from now might be very interesting.
Yeah, no, that would be super interesting if I could get them to all take IQ tests. I got a million people, some of which are dead, but yeah, it would just be rife with like, because I mean, like, what you're gonna look at somebody is Chinese, maybe, what do you base it off of? They've pretty famously been caught a lot of times trying to cheat IQ tests. Maybe you can use PISA results, but I don't know. I think
I suppose any academic testing, standardized testing you could get at in any way, especially if you throw an AI or statistical analysis at it later on, might be able to extract something.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can broadly attach like an IQ, try to find some sort of fair IQ figure for each racial subgroup. I mean, they're broad categories like Southeast Asian, it's South Asian, East Asian, white, black. So
I mean, you could do something like this, like textual analysis, where you like estimate the IQ of a person based on what they've written. Like that's done a lot because that's like the most accessible, but that's obviously very, very problematic.
yeah, I think it's just speculative. Like it's probably pretty good at getting an estimate, but I don't know. Also, it's just at the end of the day, it's just going to be like another like roasting black people thing, because you'd be like, okay, well they're overrepresented in terms of pure numbers, and
yeah, it's another.
Yeah, which like again,
it's just another. Hey guys.
Yeah, like I'm not
people are
opposed to
dumb.
that, and like you just talking about the studies because like that is what the data is. You can't sugarcoat it, but like I just don't think we're benefiting ourselves by like harping on that point too much. Like what's I don't know. There seems to be a split in sort of the far right with like the Bronze Age pervert sort of guys who like they focus on that sort of stuff a lot, and I just think it's misguided. I don't know if they're doing it for any other reason.
Well, that's because Well, it's because Bronze Age. That's because BAP's Jewish.
Yeah.
But what it could do, but what's more meaningful on that stuff is not necessarily to prove for the millionth time, hey, black people are dumb. It's to show that like, that Jews are being overrepresented out of proportion of their, of what is probably their ability. Ironically, Ron Unz, who was himself Jewish, did that piece, The Myth of Meritocracy, where he basically said, Jews really shouldn't be this many people at like the elite universities based on, because looking at sort of high school level data to see like how many high SAT scores are there. It was like, well, they're way overrepresented based on that, but maybe they're just really diligent, like academic types, maybe they just work hard in like school stuff. And so he looked at like a whole bunch of, like mathletics and science competitions and all that stuff is sort of an indicator of which population is most capable and most hardworking in those things. and he found that that really doesn't change anything at all, right? Turns out that like for a given IQ, like a Jew and a non-Jew are about, excuse me, a Jew and a non-Jewish white are about as academically invested, right? And so basically Jews should not be, the proportions that they are. So
yeah, I mean, anything
that would be what you would do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, maybe I'll pursue that at some point with it, or like I said, if someone wants to take the data and do that, I mean, be my guest. Certainly, if we have some like statistical analysts, someone who's good with R or just Python, whatever you want to do, that would be definitely useful. Yeah, just credit the site.
Well,
link it back.
Yeah. Well, I'm just like it's fun to sort of speculate about things that would be nice to have. So, and since you're doing all of it, I'll just speculate endlessly.
Yeah. I mean, even like that would like you can't add just like
that was a joke.
Oh well. Yeah, I mean, I feel free to do whatever you want with it, but I'm even just thinking like if you're talking about a group of 50 people and like 25 of them are Jews, it's like maybe they are 25 exceptionally gifted Jews and therefore they're not overrepresented based on their IQ, and you can't just apply the broad Jewish average IQ to them. It's just rife with difficulty, but
at the same time, very interesting if it could be done well, and even if a small part of the database could be enriched with that. I'm on shaky ground with stats, but I understand if you've got powerful enough ways of analyzing things, you can get something useful out of even a little bit of extra data, perhaps. I want to offer a little bit of pushback, though, that I do have sympathy for people that spend a fair bit of time looking at racial conflicts with sub-Saharan Africans and whites, especially. It's simply that, without being too highfalutin about it, the second law of thermodynamics. I mean, it's easier to break things than make things. Entropy increases. So, you can throw some chaotic, violent people into a situation and really have quite a dramatic impact on it easily. I think it's Sam Francis, isn't it, that came up with this phrase, anarcho-tyranny. That it's pretty simple to generate that. Whereas to have sophisticated systems of corruption and subversion and control and whatever, they have to be kind of carefully erected and maintained. So whether that's in the case of Jews or any other elite, there's a lot more heavy lifting being demanded to sort of explain that.
Yeah, I wonder. Do you think? I think there might be some usefulness to discussing, just realities of Black communities or whatever, insofar as it's an introduction to this sort of way of thinking. I just get a little tired with like the constant punching down as it is. It can be done to the extent that it's tasteful, so it's just a fine line.
No, I respect.
Yeah, so I think the issue. Yeah, I think there's a problem with that, which is that like there's always like a people who, for them, they're hearing it for like literally the first time, and also to like to a lot of a lot of white people, it doesn't feel like it doesn't feel like punching down.
Yeah.
Like interacting with white, so it doesn't feel that way, and like it gets tiring for like the I guess, for lack of a better term, it gets tiring for the propagandists to say the same propaganda over and over again. But for other people, they're hearing it the first time. So,
I think we may have to recycle Alex there. I think Twitter is having its glitchy fun again. In the meantime, I don't know, Ryan, if you've had an opportunity to meet Handsome Truth HT. He's up here as a speaker. Perhaps he'd be kind enough to introduce himself while we're getting Alex back on the panel.
Hey, I was just, is it your birthday?
It's the birthday of one of our panelists. I can't say who because I don't want to be responsible for doxing anyone, but you may say happy birthday and the appropriate person will be happy to hear you say it, I'm sure.
All right, well, happy birthday. I thought it was your birthday, but happy birthday, whoever's birthday
Well,
it is.
I suppose it may or may not be mine or anyone else's, but thank you for your birthday wishes, HT. How are you today?
I'm good. I saw the leather apron guy in here, and I just want to say you do amazing work. I mean, very normie friendly and very articulate. and I saw some post about Wikipedia in the early life, and I didn't really understand what the um, I didn't understand where you were going with that. Like you've created like a website that is going to like preserve the early life, or I just maybe I read it wrong. I'm not sure. So since you're up here, I figured I'd just ask you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. Thanks for the kind words. Yeah, the website is just kind of what I've been talking about throughout the space, but essentially, it will have all of the people on Wikipedia, all the articles, so anyone you could find on there, they're going to be on my website, and then some. And it's going to have, among other things, information about their ethnicity. So, sort of the simplest use case for it would be as a replacement to the early life check, as people typically use Wikipedia for. So, yeah, pretty much any person you want to look up, you can go to the website and get that information. In addition to a lot more meaningful information, but yeah, the idea is eventually we're going to have any and all public figures. So there's going to be no doxing of people, and we're going to be pretty strict about data. But yeah, any and all public figures, users will be able to go in and make new entries for them if the website happens to be missing them. And yeah, actually, fun bit on that. I'm working on building it out right now. This portion in particular, but I'm gonna have like achievements hopefully at some point. As of right now, there's like medals you can get, so kind of trying to gamify it a little bit, which gamify counting I think is kind of funny. But yeah, the data set right now is over 1 million people, so it's already got tons of information. And the plan is I've been working on it for like a year, but plan is to go live this month, and I'll
Awesome.
put out a video announcing that.
It's great. Well, continue the good work, man. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I've obviously seen a ton of your clips. Very funny.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Well, I know when to listen, and when there's big brains, I tend to just sit back and listen. So, happy birthday to the anonymous birthday person and to Leather Apron. Good luck on the journey and continue making those big brain videos. I get lost in them, man. So, it's good for the normies. Very digestible. You've got it down to a science of just being able to put out those big brain thoughts and make it digestible for a normie. So kudos
Yeah,
to you. I'm
thanks,
kind of in
man.
the opposite field. Well, I guess when it comes to like laughter and stuff like that, that's kind of like a normie way in. But as far as my rhetoric goes, it's it's complete opposite of what you're doing. But I really still respect it.
Yeah, I get it, man. Different strokes, though.
And I'm not sure if Ryan,
Happy
you had
birthday.
a chance to say hi to HT as well. I don't know if you guys have met or spoken before.
No, I don't. No, I don't think we've met. I'm not familiar with his work. So, hello.
Hi. I don't know. You might see those flyers going around that say every single aspect of COVID is Jewish, or every single aspect of blah blah blah. They're like these big flyers that kind of go around on X, go viral quite a bit. Um, I run that site, GTV Flyers, and I have a pro white site called goyimtv.com, which has like kind of like I'd say like they would call it extreme content, where we're not going to sugarcoat our language or censor each other as long as we're pro white. And yeah, that site's been taken down multiple times. So, but I'm sure Leather Apron seems like he's got a little background in tech. Know that if that website's successful, that the ADL is going to do whatever they can to bring down your domain provider, or DDoS and all that fun stuff that comes with owning a website.
Hey, have you been in contact with the Mike Enoch and the TRS guys? Like, because they've been able to keep their side up.
Yeah, I actually went to an NJP event before it dissolved. It was actually pretty cool. A lot of people say, yeah, the NJP, look what it did. Oh, it didn't do nothing. Brought a lot of white people together, and boy, oh boy, if you've never experienced that, it was a great time. I had an awesome time. They were giving speeches. There was great food, great camaraderie, and unfortunately, it's dissolved now. But yeah, I know Mike. I got a chance to meet him. I know that they went through some of that stuff, but I mean, there's all kinds of fuckery that they'll play, these Jews, when it comes to an effective website. I'm doing all right though. I got a couple guys that are. There's a lot of these tech nerds are coming out to be, they're hard to find, but there's some big brain pro white guys that are on our side in tech.
That's good.
I notice Andrew Anglin seems to be able to keep his site up these days. Daily Stormer, very good for the memes.
Yeah, he's got I think his site is probably. I think he's got us beat. I think we got the right stuff beat as far as visits, but I think Anglin's he's got it on lockdown when it comes to most traffic on the pro white website. But I was kind of surprised he went Groyper for a little bit and saw a political solution, which I didn't think I was going to hear that kind of rhetoric. But I'm not sure if he's still on Team Trump, but I think everyone knows now that Trump's cooked. So,
talking of the Groypers, I just wonder if any of you have heard anything or in the way of an official statement or something close to that from someone at X or Elon or one of his hangarounds. Is there even an official reason given for why those high-profile Groyper accounts were all blanket banned at once? I mean, we kind of obviously know the reason because they oppose Elon successfully. At least that's how it appears on the face of it. But is there even the claim that they broke some law or violated some TOS, or is there even an official line?
So Academic Agent actually did a thing. It's not dispositive, but and he didn't. It was by no means comprehensive what he did. He basically took sort of an opportunity sample of Groyper accounts, and you can look up what Academic Agent did. But he found that there's a lot of botting going on with the Groyper stuff. So a lot of those. So the problem
Ryan.
is that
I know something. I know something about that. I have a recorded space recently with 166,000 listeners, apparently.
Yeah. So sorry to burst your bubble. I don't think you actually had that many listeners. I think that one time we were on, I was on a space and we had something less than that, but had like 32,000 listeners or something. Sadly, I don't think that was the case. But yeah, and what I think may have happened is that there may have been like a bot sweep, and in the bot sweep, a lot of non-bot Groypers got swept up in that as well. That's my
just to be clear. Are you talking about people who are purely the victims of bots, or people who had themselves been using bots for some effect?
No, I mean that basically there's a sweep of Groyper bots, but then like actual Groypers got banned because the sweep is looking for Groyper types and that are bots, but then they get Groypers who are not bots.
Now,
I think that
I see. So you would hope that through the appeals process, someone who's not a bot could be restored, and to my knowledge, that hasn't occurred.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just giving my speculation. But Academic Agent did a thing that seemed to evidence that a high proportion of the Groypers are bots. The problem, though, is that you can never be like certain, and it's so many that you'd have to look through. It has to be automated, and if it's automated, right, but in terms of the appeals, why aren't they being reinstated by appeals? I don't know. That's
Yeah, it's a bit murky, isn't it? There must be enough, no offense to the USA, but there must be enough young American teenagers out there that may as well be bots who are so sort of easily swayed by a meme that they'll just, yeah, I'm a Groyper now. So it's hard to distinguish between them and actual bots, I guess.
Right, especially, and that's going to be even more of the case with LLMs. Like the thing is, if you get like a decent LLM and give that LLM access to Twitter, it could probably it could probably pass as a human better than quite a few humans. It's a bit of an issue. that were happening now. So finding bots is just gonna, it's eventually just gonna become impossible to where like bots are just straight up conversational humans. So
yeah, it's like I'm discovering this too. It's like charisma and humanity and warmth are not actually properties of humans. They're just properties, and they're very often more plausibly exhibited by LLMs.
yeah, like for now, LLMs they're like way too they're far more polite than a real human would be. And you could like say to an LLM like, "Hey, you're a piece of shit." And you say, "I," and it would be like, "I'm sorry. What would I? How can I change my behavior to better satisfy?" Right. So they're still like that. But if you get like third party bots that won't do that, that will react more like a human will to negativity, which is rampant on Twitter, then yeah, it's harder and harder to identify. It's not like the past where bots were, simple text spinners. So.
Yeah, Ryan, you've been doing a lot of work with AI recently. It just occurs to me, maybe you could sort of encourage one to believe that it has a personality disorder and then go about using Twitter.
Yeah, you can do that. I mean, that's not. I mean, you couldn't do it in what I call like the okay. So I see LLMs as like sort of 3 tiers. Like there's the top tier, which is like ChatGPT, Claude, Google Gemini, Grok as well. Would be in this tier. Grok is probably like the worst of the top tier, but there's still a gulf between Grok and say what I call third-party hosted LLMs. So there's that top tier, and then there's like the third-party hosted LLMs, which can be anywhere from like 405 billion parameters to like 70 billion parameters, and then there's like self-hosted LLMs. So those are like the 3 tiers. And
Grok seems to be like those.
You're not.
Sorry, go ahead.
So anyway, so you're not going to be able. So you're probably not going to be able to. You may be able to with creative prompting to get one of the top tier LLMs to act like it has a personality disorder. But those top tier LLMs, they have all sorts of system prompt stuff that prevents you from being able to get it to do really fun stuff. So it would most likely be these what I call the third party hosted, the 1 tier below that. These would have enough horsepower to be a passable human for like short Twitter conversations, but you're not going to be able to over a long conversation. Talking with a middle tier LLM is going to be they're going to reveal themselves pretty quickly as not a person and stuff, and make basic logical errors.
Even if you had time to sort of carefully feed it the right data, so it knew all about borderline personality disorder and subclinical psychopathy and whatever you wanted it to be able to emulate, you don't think you could get it to sort of reliably, consistently be, borderline bot or whatever it might be?
You could get it to be persistently borderline bot. The problem is it would be discovered as a bot. Whereas a top tier LLM that exists today, I think, could pass persistently, like indefinitely. Whereas what the middle tier bot, the third party hosted LLMs like Mistral or something, would not pass indefinitely. Like eventually you would have a conversation with it and it would start to say like a lot of hallucinatory nonsense. There's a lot of like when you talk with an LLMs for a long time, you start to pick up on what is like an LLM-ism. You start to develop sort of a sense of like, oh, that's like LLM thing. And it's also weird when you talk to LLMs, you start to learn like what needs to be explained and what doesn't need to be explained, so.
You actually remind me of one of Alex's older videos. What was it? Alex title? How it was about linguistics, wasn't it? How the crowd is made to accept. Oh, what was the title exactly? I'm scared to go and look on YouTube because it can make X a bit glitchy. The audio starts crackling, but I'm sure you remember.
Yeah. Just clever ways to use language to like manipulate sentiment. Yeah, that was quite an old one.
Was it how the crowd is made to accept something or the truth or what it? You commented on the multiplicity of inputs to English, the various languages, and the way we have so many synonyms for things. We can be euphemistic and indirect, and I thought that was a really interesting video. I've shown that to friends a few times, and I just wondered, as that was one of your older videos, whether you had a route into YouTube through some interest in linguistics or what have you.
A passive. I don't. I have a passive interest, I suppose, in linguistics. Study a couple languages. I think it'd be cool to be the next Jared Taylor. So I know a little bit of Japanese, to sort of slot into that role. So yeah, just a very passive sort of interest in it. Like, so I think I've made like a video or two on linguistics. But
God,
I think the next Jared Taylor needs to learn Chinese.
perhaps, but
that's bizarre. Everyone I know speaks like one of my regular co-hosts speaks some Japanese. My fiance speaks Japanese. You speak Japanese. Jared Taylor. Apparently, Ryan, LLMs start naturally defaulting to Japanese when they're talking to each other because it's a more efficient way of communicating. Is that the case?
Chinese.
Oh, really?
Chinese. And it's not something that happens consistently. It's something that happens when, okay, so I had like two LLMs talking, and these were two Gemini 1121 experimental models, which are not publicly available now. They were when I used them. Anyway, but I had them talking, and I just let them go. I was copying and pasting back and forth. But we were pushing like conversations over a million tokens. So it's not something that happens quickly or anything like that, and I doubt it's even consistent. But that's one thing that happened when I was using them. So.
Hey, sorry, just to let you know, I got to run in a minute or two.
Actually, Alex, yeah, I should have asked you that a little earlier. I've already taken far more of your time than I anticipated you being available for. That's really very much appreciated. And I know that listeners, both live and the recorded space subsequently, are going to be very, very happy that you came along. I've popped your video, by the way, how the crowd is made to accept what it hates. That's the one I was thinking of. That's shared in the Jumbotron right now and in the pill. In case someone has a burning question for Alex that they want to ask while there's an opportunity, I will take requests. Serena, I notice you're there. I don't know if you're AFK, but as a host, I have one eye on that. And Ryan, I don't know if there's... Oops, is Ryan still with us? I think Ryan might be recycling. Give us just one moment. It's X being its normal glitchy thing. There you go. Ryan is back with us. And Ryan, while we have Alex for a further period, if you on your way back up to speaker status, if you want to pop any further questions or comments across to him.
Yeah. So I was just I don't know a whole lot about this, but I always suspected that like you say, you're into linguistics. Like, what do you think about Chomsky's in deep structure and how that relates to how LLMs completely do not follow anything Chomsky, any of Chomsky's theories regarding language? Do you have any commentary about that?
I'm not familiar with what you said about Chomsky. Is this like a grammatical thing?
It's called deep structure. Like,
so language acquisition devices you're thinking about, Ryan?
Yeah, like basically how like everybody like there's a fundamental structure of language that exists primordially in the brain. If I had, I don't know, that's just something that popped into my head. Unfortunately, it's been so long ago since I learned about Chomsky's language theories. But apparently, like, LLMs operate completely different from what Chomsky is saying how language works. The funny thing is, though, that neural nets were originally devised as a model for how humans use language and acquire language. So they're based on a theory that is obviously counter to what Chomsky thinks on how language actually functions in humans. So I don't know.
Yeah. Sounds very interesting, but definitely beyond my pay grade. So I probably wouldn't be able to give a very satisfactory answer anyways.
Frankly, beyond mine. I basically just told you the extent of my knowledge
Yeah.
of the whole thing.
Yeah, I've used LLMs insofar as they're useful. You know, I've actually started to use them a little bit in my day job, even just for just really like rote annoying things like writing regex. If anyone's familiar with that, regular expressions sucks. Like ChatGPT is actually really good for that, and they helped a lot with the data gathering. But you know, I haven't gone like super egghead into like diving into how they work. I'm more very much a user of them.
I mean, till quite recently, and still to a large extent, the study of neurolinguistics is sort of hamstrung by the resolution of fMRI machines and all of those things. We're at the infancy of that level of analysis, really. So everyone who isn't doing PhD level research can be forgiven for not being up to speed with that right now, I think.
Yeah.
But well, look, Alex, I
Well,
think as you've had so much of your time for us, I think it's an appropriate point to just thank you very much indeed for coming. And it's just been a real pleasure. And I know Mr. Taylor was happy to speak to you as well, as was HT, and I'm sure Ryan here. So, you know, further down the road with this project of yours as it develops and anything else that you're doing, please, you know, from myself, be aware that I'm extremely happy to have a public conversation with you about those things. It's actually a real honor. It's been some years, you know, I remember very clearly the first time I saw, especially of course your Joe Rogan video. Sorry to be someone else harping on that when you've done so much other stuff, but it sticks in the head.
Yeah.
And it's a
No,
real pleasure to
it's
talk
probably
to you.
just because I haven't put out enough stuff. I really wish I could like just be more prolific and like put out a video, you know, maybe once a month. It's just I don't know, doing quality content. At least for me, I'm just like it's glacially slow at this stuff. Yeah.
Well, look,
Um,
quality over quantity, Alex. I'm aiming for something like that with the way I'm using X, that I'm very happy if I go for long periods without hosting a space. It doesn't have to be regular. I'm not going for huge numbers of people following me. I just want to have productive, civilized conversations with interesting people. That's simply the aim.
yeah, very good. That's probably the way to do it. Yeah, in any case, thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah, well, we can do this again sometime in the future.
I very much hope so. I will. Anytime that you're available to do that, I will absolutely make time. I should also say, as it's a recorded space, let it be known, I've been awake since 4:30 this morning. It's now 1:30 in the morning the next day, and if I sound a little bit tired, it's because I am, in fact. But it's probably good in another way. Otherwise, I'd just be jumping up and down like an excited little boy that I get to talk to these people. So now I sound a bit nonchalant about it. It's fantastic. So, Alex, thank you so much for coming along. And definitely please come to the next one. Permanent invitation will be extended. And same, of course, to Alternative Hypothesis here.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right. Yeah. Great speaking to you.
Yeah, you as well, man. Hope to do it in the future. You have a good night.
And sure, so to all our listeners as well, thank you ever so much for coming along. Spaces are not spaces worth having unless people are paying attention to them. So thank you for coming and listening. It's obviously a recorded space. You can share the link with your friends. And barring weird behavior from X or complaints of some sizable number, it should remain up. So with that, I will say, perhaps, Ryan, if you have a moment, check your DM afterwards. I'll have a brief chat with you if you have a few minutes. And also, Alex, thank you for coming. Till the next time, everyone, take care. Have a good one. I will end the space here.